It's that time again where we shed light on South African entrepreneurs that are making strides in their respective fields. Today we're joined by communications leader Thulisile Phiri. She's telling us more about the work that she's done at the African Storyteller, a business that you founded yourself. Thank you very much for joining us in studio. Tell us a little bit about the African Storyteller. The name is quite important because I suppose it sets you apart from comms work than any other organization would be doing. But tell us about the business and why it was important to be the African Storyteller.
So, good evening. I suppose it's already evening to you and to the viewers at home. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about my passion, all right, the African Storyteller. So, the African Storyteller is a public affairs consultancy. We offer primarily government relations, media relations, stakeholder relations, and thought leadership and investment dialogue services to blue chip companies across the continent. The African Storyteller. So, everybody's asking me about why the African Storyteller? How did that came about? I think for me, it really resembles the importance of us as Africans to actually own our narrative and to actually be the ambassadors that are going to reshape Africa's narrative. You know, having worked in corporates for the past 25 years, you know, traveling around the world, one of the consistent thing was really that when people talk about Africa, you know, with so much authority, and yet they are not even Africans and they're outside of the continent, they would always portray Africa as a continent that is hard to do business in, as a continent riddled by corruption, and as a continent that is basically riddled by poverty, right? And for me, I knew that as a continent, we've got so much to offer. That is why you've got so many investors, you know, coming here. So the same people that come here, kind of like when they're outside, they portray us differently. So I thought, you know, in my own little way, in my corner, I would actually be that person that actually promotes Africa to Africa and to global investors so that the money starts coming into Africa and we create the much needed jobs and we start rewriting the narrative. We stop begging for, you know, donations and for grants and all of that. But most importantly, we actually own our future and build the Africa that we want. So the African Storyteller really is she who promotes Africa to Africa and to the world.
How did you do that? How did you break through that narrative? Because you correctly described that the African story for so long has been told by those who aren't African. So breaking through that narrative that everybody is familiar with, how difficult was that? And do you think that you have succeeded in completely breaking down this view that the world may have of us?
So I actually think, you know, it actually starts with us, you know, influencing the circles where we are actually operating in. So my last corporate job was with General Electric, and I really got the opportunity to travel across the world. And everywhere I went, I would actually get the sentiments about Africa that are not so correct, and I would always make sure that I'm correcting them. So, you know, it actually started with me kind of like thinking, oh, not again. You know, you're not going to say that again, right? But then I actually realized, actually, this is an opportunity to basically educate, you know, create awareness and actually correct, you know, the myths about Africa. And I think for me that is where it actually started. And then moving into running my own business and actually doing that, I was quite privileged that, you know, when I actually decided I'm resigning from my last job, my employer at the time said, we're coming on board as your first client. So that was cool, right? And then suddenly I get so many other people that I had met through business basically saying, we're also on board, we're also on board, we're also on board. But most importantly, in the 6 years, I've actually had the privilege of working across the continent in countries such as Zambia, Malawi, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Namibia, Nigeria, Ghana, and, you know, also beyond the continent in Germany, in Russia, you know, Russia actually quite often because we had a client that was a Russian client, so we would actually be going there quite often. And I really think that because we engage at a very senior level, like at CEO level, if it's corporate, or at government level, if it's at government level to be ministers or your presidents or whoever, that actually allowed us to use our proximity to power and being able to have a seat at the table to actually tell the story of an Africa that is prosperous, a story of an Africa that is growing. But most importantly, to demystify how our governments can actually work with business and do work with business by bringing government and business closer together to actually work together for the broader benefit or for the broader good of our people. And whenever we speak to investors, they'd be like, we don't want to talk to government because they're corrupt. But you've got your investment in the country. Government makes policies. They make laws that you need to adhere to. So you've got some skin in the game. You can't avoid that. You need to actually engage and make sure that you are working together to create an enabling environment. And because we work with investors, just this past week I was speaking at the BRICS colloquium on how B2B opportunities can be unlocked in the BRICS countries. And in engagements like that, you are always emphasizing the need for us as Africans to actually see ourselves as equals, but most importantly, the need for us to actually be patriotic and be proud of who we are and basically say, this is who we are, this is what we've got to offer, and this is why you should bring your money here.
I mean, it's a noble venture that the African Storyteller is on at the moment. But truth be told, for South Africa as an example, we have our issues at government level, private corporate level. There are many issues. And so as a communications expert or leader, how do you spin the story in such a way that people will look at us and think, okay, well, there is load shedding, there are water problems, there are inefficiencies in government, but this is still a viable place to bring our investment?
So I think for me, actually, you start with the successful case studies. We've got a lot of global companies that are headquartered here. That's the first thing. We've got a country that has the best infrastructure amongst the best in the continent. We've got a financial services sector that is highly respected globally. We've got an IT sector that is actually, of world standards, of global standards. And if you talk about the problems, show me one country that doesn't have problems. I don't want to mention countries, but, if I can actually say, look at France, right? Look at France, so countries will have their good and they will have their challenges, and challenges are there to actually be overcome. But I actually believe that we also have the numbers, just in terms of us being a gateway to the 1.3 billion, African continent, and basically being able to offer a Eurocentric market where it's easy to actually come in and basically set up. I do believe that what we've got to offer is actually much more than whatever challenges that we actually have.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us in studio. And I wish we could talk for so much longer because there's so many interesting moving parts in the industry, but we appreciate your time and we wish you the very best of luck as the African Storyteller.
Thank you for having
doing
us.
her bit to tell the African story the way that it should be told, and not by those who are necessarily from the African continent. That is Thulisile Phiri, who's the founder of the African Storyteller, another South African doing amazing thing on the African continent.